What if I told you that right now, in the year 2025, the Indonesian government is quietly preparing to unearth what could be the world's oldest pyramid, a vast, enigmatic structure that may have been built not just before the Egyptian pharaohs, but before agriculture, before writing, before most of what we consider history even began. Buried beneath a hill in West Java, it may have stood here for 28,000 years. That date alone forces us to reimagine human origins, to wonder if our ancestors wielded tools, sciences, and technologies far beyond what we've been taught. Technologies that, if proven, would shake the foundations of archaeology, anthropology, and perhaps even geopolitics. It's a claim so bold that it has drawn not only passionate advocates, but fierce opponents and some whisper powerful enemies. Imagine massive basalt stones humming with strange vibrations, underground chambers that may once have been sanctuaries, storehouses of knowledge, or energy generators. Imagine that this place was already old when the first ice sheets began to melt, a sentinel from a forgotten world. And imagine that, for reasons we can only guess at, powerful institutions might prefer it to remain forgotten. This is the story of Gunung Padang, a site that appears at first glance to be just a grassy hill rising from mist-wrapped highlands. But beneath its soil, geophysical scans have revealed terraces laid out with the symmetry of a master architect, voids shaped like halls, and a precision in the placement of stones that seems more purposeful than nature's hand. Some researchers believe these stones vibrate at frequencies aligned with ancient musical scales, frequencies that could, in theory, interact with the Earth's magnetic field. Were they used in rituals to heal the sick? To lift the stones themselves without brute force? To send messages into the sky? The questions alone feel like the opening lines of a lost epic, and this epic has its turning point in 2023 when Dr. Danny Hilman Natawija, a geologist with Indonesia's National Research and Innovation Agency, published a study that sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. His data, gathered with ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and core drilling, revealed three major phases of construction. The uppermost layers were built between 2,500 and 3,500 years ago, within the range of known Indonesian megaliths. Beneath that, a second layer dating to around 8,000 years ago, a time when much of the world was still in the Neolithic. And then, far below, a third layer, sealed and untouched for tens of millennia, dating to between 25,000 and 28,000 years. Before the present. If true, this would place the earliest phase of Gunung Padang in the Upper Paleolithic, an era we associate with cave paintings and stone tools, not with monumental, multi-layered pyramids. It would imply that humans here were quarrying stone, aligning terraces, perhaps tracking the stars, when much of the northern hemisphere lay frozen under ice. The paper was bold in its conclusions. This was not a natural hill. It was deliberate. Architecture, and its deepest chambers might still hold artifacts from a forgotten civilization. But almost as soon as it was published, the backlash came, swift and brutal. Critics called the claims deeply flawed, arguing that the radiocarbon dates were from organic soil, not from human-made objects, and therefore could not be directly tied to construction. Some suggested the patterns in the stone were natural, products of volcanic activity eroded into symmetry over eons. By March 2024, the journal Archaeological Prospection retracted the paper. On paper, it was a procedural correction. To many watching, it felt like the closing of a door. And yet, retractions rarely end stories like this. Instead, they feed them. To believers, the move looked like an act of intellectual suppression, part of a larger reluctance to acknowledge any civilization that could rival or surpass the achievements of Mesopotamia, Egypt, or Rome. To skeptics, it was the responsible trimming away of unsupported speculation. But to those of us who stand between the two camps, it was the deepening of the mystery, the moment when Gunung Padang, moved from being just an archaeological curiosity into the realm of legend, conspiracy, and global intrigue. Because if the deepest layers truly do date back to 28,000 years ago, then some society built them. And if they built them, we have to ask, who were they? How did they live? What did they know? Did they, like the builders of other ancient enigmas, leave messages encoded in stone? Messages meant not for their contemporaries, but for us? It is in the tension between these questions and the official answers that the modern battle over Gunung Padang is fought. And as we follow this thread, we will walk not just through the terraces of an Indonesian hill, but through the fault lines of our own understanding, where the past we think we know is challenged by the past that may have been asterisk at first sight. Gunung Padang hardly looks like the sort of place that could provoke an international storm. From a distance, it is a green, rounded hill, its slopes wrapped in coffee plantations and bamboo groves, the kind of serene landscape more likely to inspire a postcard than a scientific revolution. But step closer, and the illusion of ordinariness begins to fracture. The summit reveals a cascade of terraces, 5 broad, flat steps climbing toward the crest, each edged with massive basalt columns. These are not loose boulders strewn at random. They are hexagonal pillars, their faces weathered but still sharply angled, stacked in deliberate arrangements. Some lie prone, others stand upright like sentinels, as if frozen mid-construction. Beneath the grass, the earth holds more than meets the eye. Geophysical scans, ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography have probed the hill like an X-ray, revealing that the terraces are only the surface of a far deeper structure. Below, there appear to be hollow spaces, rectangular voids, narrow passage-like anomalies, and dense stonework that does not match the natural layering of volcanic rock. In some sections, these voids are aligned in such a way that they could be chambers or corridors, their symmetry more reminiscent of architecture than geology. Even without excavation, there are signs that this place is unusual. Some of the stones, when struck, give off a resonant tone, like the ring of a bell. Tests by researchers have measured specific frequencies, some in the range of 110 Hz, others at 440 Hz, the same pitch as the modern orchestral A. Such tones are not unique to Gunung Padang, megaliths at other ancient sites, from Malta to South America, have also sung when tapped, but here, combined with the site's suspected age, they invite more speculative interpretations. Were these resonances accidental? Or could the builders have chosen these stones deliberately, tuning their placement to create a soundscape for rituals, healing practices, or even the manipulation of matter itself? There's also the matter of alignment. Surveys suggest that certain rows of pillars and edges of the terraces point toward significant celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of specific stars. For most modern visitors, it's easy to imagine a ceremony unfolding here thousands of years ago. People gathered under a sky free of light pollution. The Milky Way stretched like a river overhead, the stones beneath their feet humming faintly, as if in reply to the heavens. But perhaps the most haunting detail is the sense of concealment. Vegetation has overgrown much of the stonework. In some places, you can only see the tops of the pillars protruding like black teeth through the soil. And the hill's outline, smooth and unassuming, could easily fool the casual eye. For decades it did. To locals, the terraces were part of the landscape woven into folklore. To outsiders, they were invisible. Only with the aid of modern instruments have the patterns beneath become undeniable. These first glimpses, both with the naked eye and through the lenses of technology, are what have drawn archaeologists, geologists, and adventurers alike to Gunung Padang. For some, it is the prospect of rewriting the human story that fuels the fascination. For others, it is the challenge of explaining the inexplicable without surrendering to fantasy. And for a growing number of people around the world, It is something more visceral, the feeling that this place is a threshold, a doorway between our present and a deep past that refuses to be silent. In 2023, the simmering curiosity around Gunung Padang erupted into global attention. At the center of it all stood Dr. Danny Hilman Natawidja, a soft-spoken but determined geologist from Indonesia's National Research and Innovation Agency. Hilman had already spent more than a decade studying the site with an array of modern tools, but the findings he and his team released that year in the journal Archaeological Prospection were nothing short of incendiary. Their work was meticulous, rooted in a battery of geophysical techniques, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to map density changes beneath the surface, seismic tomography to measure the speed of vibrations through the ground, and core drilling to extract narrow columns of earth and stone for direct analysis. What emerged was a picture of Gunung Padang as a layered monument, not a single construction event, but a project expanded and modified across tens of thousands of years. According to the paper, there were 3 distinct building phases. The uppermost layer, dubbed Unit 1, consisted of the visible terraces and stone arrangements. Radiocarbon dates from associated materials placed this phase between 2,500 and 3,500 years ago, relatively recent in archaeological terms, and roughly in line with other megalithic traditions in Southeast Asia. Beneath this lay Unit 2, a more compact arrangement of basalt columns and soil fill, lying 3 to 5 meters below the surface. This layer, the team reported, dated to between 7,500 and 8,300 years before present, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than Stonehenge, and contemporary with some of the earliest known agricultural societies. Then came Unit 3, the deepest and most startling discovery, a dense matrix of modified basalt lying 15 to 20 meters down, with radiocarbon dates ranging from 25,000 to 28,000 years ago. This was the Upper Paleolithic, a time when much of Eurasia was locked in the grip of the last ice age. In the conventional view, humans at this stage were hunter-gatherers, adept at stone knapping and survival, but far from the organized large-scale builders implied by Gunung Padang's deep strata. The paper went further, noting geophysical evidence of rectangular voids within Unit 3, spaces that could be chambers or corridors, their outlines too geometric to be dismissed as natural fissures. The authors speculated that these voids might hold artifacts sealed away for millennia, potentially offering direct insight into the people who built the earliest phase of the site. What made the claims even more provocative was the suggestion that the builders possessed not just architectural skill, but advanced material knowledge. Analyses of the bonding matrix in the deeper layers indicated a cement-like compound of clay, silica, and iron oxides, a formulation that, if deliberately manufactured, would predate known concrete technologies by more than 20,000 years. The implications were clear. Gunung Padang was not a natural hill dressed up with stones in recent centuries. It was a monumental complex, initiated in the depths of prehistory, added to and revered by successive cultures, and preserved under layers of earth until the present day. The study's conclusions were audacious, but they were also careful to acknowledge uncertainties. Hillman's team called for further excavation, ideally reaching the deep chambers detected in scans, to secure direct evidence, tools, skeletal remains, inscriptions that could confirm the human hand in Unit 3's construction. In academic terms, it was an open invitation for dialogue and collaboration. Instead, what followed was a storm. The media seized on the headline-ready phrases, "World's oldest pyramid, 28,000 years old, rewrites history." Some outlets framed it as Indonesia's answer to Egypt's Giza, a national treasure that could upend the global archaeological hierarchy. Social media lit up with viral images, some real, others AI-generated fantasies, showing Gunung Padang is a pristine stone pyramid bursting through the jungle. For many in the public, it was thrilling. For others in the academic establishment, it was a red flag. Extraordinary claims, they argued, require extraordinary evidence, and for a site like this, the burden of proof was immense. Yet for a brief moment in 2023, before the counterattack began, Gunung Padang stood on the edge of redefining humanity's story. A remote hill in West Java had become the stage for one of the most tantalizing and contentious archaeological revelations of the 21st century. The celebration didn't last. By March 2024, less than 6 months after publication, Archaeological Prospection issued a formal retraction of Hillman's paper. On paper, the reason sounded procedural. The journal claimed there was a major error in associating the radiocarbon dates from organic soil samples with the site's human construction. Without direct artifacts from the deepest layers, they argued, the dates could not be tied conclusively to human activity. To Hillman's critics, this was vindication. Prominent archaeologists, including Cardiff University's Flint Dibble, called the original conclusions deeply flawed and wishful thinking. The symmetrical stone arrangements, a result of natural columnar jointing in volcanic basalt, weathered and shifted over thousands of years. The rectangular voids in geophysical scans, merely pockets created by ancient geological fractures. The radiocarbon dates, contaminated or displaced, perhaps washed down from higher layers by floods or animal burrowing. In their view, there was no need to invoke a 28,000-year-old civilization when simpler, natural explanations fit the evidence. To suggest otherwise, they argued, was to court pseudo-archaeology, the same slippery ground occupied by fringe theories about Atlantis, ancient aliens, and lost super-civilizations. But to Hillman and his supporters, the retraction was something else entirely. An act of intellectual gatekeeping, even censorship. They insisted that the journal had ignored supplementary data submitted during peer review, high-resolution seismic profiles, for example, that still pointed to artificial geometry deep within the hill. Hillman argued that the multidisciplinary nature of the research had been undervalued, that geologists, physicists, and engineers had contributed findings that didn't fit neatly into the archaeological orthodoxy. The timing of the retraction added fuel to conspiracy theories. Why retract a peer-reviewed study so quickly, without allowing a formal rebuttal? Some saw the hand of vested interests, institutions and governments that might prefer to keep Southeast Asia on the periphery of ancient history's grand narrative. After all, if Gunung Padang really was a Paleolithic engineering marvel, it would dethrone the Nile and the Fertile Crescent as the sole cradles of monumental construction. Social media, as always, amplified the divide. Hashtags like #PADANGTruth and #28K-years-old trended across Twitter and TikTok. Amateurs pored over the original paper, geophysical images, and photographs of the terraces, pointing out anomalies they believed confirmed the site's man-made origins. Opponents dismissed these as pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist. Meanwhile, conspiracy-leaning forums took the debate further, suggesting that the site's deepest chambers might contain technology or records capable of reshaping our understanding of human history, and that these possibilities were precisely why official channels were trying to shut the conversation down. Some drew parallels to other controversial cases: the Sphinx erosion debate, the slow drip revelations about Göbekli Tepe, or the decades-long dismissal of Neanderthal art. By mid-2024, the atmosphere around Gunung Padang had shifted. The mainstream academic community regarded the 28,000-year claim as discredited. The alternative history community saw the retraction as proof of a cover-up. And in between stood a small but vocal group of researchers arguing that, whatever the truth, the site deserved deeper, more transparent investigation. If anything, the retraction didn't kill the story, it deepened the mystery. Gunung Padang was no longer just a site in the hills of West Java. It was a case study in how science, politics, and public perception collide, and how the struggle over the past is also a struggle over who gets to tell the story of humanity. If the battle over Gunung Padang were unfolding in isolation, it might be easier to dismiss. But the site's controversy sits within a much larger pattern of global anomalies, archaeological puzzles that seem to hint at a deeper, interconnected past. Perhaps the most prominent voice weaving these threads together is investigative journalist and author Graham Hancock. In his 2022 Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, Hancock devoted a full episode to Gunung Padang, presenting it as part of a worldwide network of sites that challenge the orthodox timeline of human civilization. His core thesis is that a mother civilization flourished during the Ice Age, developing advanced knowledge in astronomy, engineering, and navigation, only to be wiped out by a cataclysm roughly 12,000 years ago. Survivors, he argues, scattered across the globe, seeding myths and megaliths from the Americas to Asia. For Hancock, Gunung Padang isn't just another pile of stones. It's a possible smoking gun, evidence that humans in Southeast Asia were building monumental structures long before Egypt's pharaohs or Sumer's city-states. He places it alongside Yonaguni Monument, Japan, a vast, stepped structure lying beneath 25 meters of seawater, with terraces and straight edges that some believe are carved by human hands, submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. Göbekli Tepe, Turkey, an 11,000-year-old sanctuary of T-shaped stone pillars adorned with intricate carvings, intentionally buried by its builders for reasons still unknown. The Sphinx, Egypt, which Hancock and a handful of geologists argue may show erosion patterns from heavy rainfall, pushing its construction thousands of years earlier than conventional Egyptology allows. The thematic parallels are hard to ignore. Megalithic architecture, astronomical alignments, anomalous dating, and crucially, cultural memories of catastrophic floods. Hancock points to flood myths not as mere folklore, but as encoded history. The biblical story of Noah, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, Hindu accounts of Manu, and countless indigenous traditions from Polynesia to the Andes all tell of a deluge that destroyed a former world. In Southeast Asia, these memories often center on Sundaland, a now submerged continental shelf that once connected much of modern Indonesia to mainland Asia. During the Ice Age, this landmass would have been a fertile expanse, ideal for settlement. As glaciers melted, rising seas swallowed it, leaving only the scattered islands we know today. In this context, Gunung Padang could have been a highland refuge, a place where survivors gathered as the lowlands disappeared. The terraces, then, might not only be ceremonial, but also symbolic, a physical testament to endurance in the face of world-changing disaster. Of course, mainstream archaeology urges caution. Similarities between sites, they argue, do not prove a shared origin. Cultures across the world have independently aligned structures to celestial events, built with megaliths, and told flood stories. Because the stars are visible to everyone, large stones are a practical building material, and floods are a universal human experience. Yet Hancock's framing resonates with millions, in part because it acknowledges the gaps, the missing pieces of prehistory that conventional timelines struggle to explain. And for those captivated by these mysteries, Gunung Padang becomes more than just an Indonesian curiosity. It becomes a node in a lost global network, a remnant of a time when the human story might have been far stranger and far older than we've been taught. In this larger, myth-laden context that the site's allure intensifies. To its champions, Gunung Padang doesn't just challenge history. It connects to a forgotten world that may still be whispering to us from beneath the earth and the sea. Asterisk, long before seismographs, carbon dating, and ground-penetrating radar arrived. In West Java, Gunung Padang already occupied a vivid place in the imaginations of the Sundanese people. To the villagers of Karyamukti, it is not merely a hill, but a living monument, a place where the earth and the unseen world overlap. Its name itself carries layers of meaning. Padang can mean field or plain, but here it evokes a field of enlightenment, a spiritual plateau where one can ascend not only in body, but in wisdom. The most enduring tale centers on King Siliwangi, a semi-mythical ruler of the Pajajaran kingdom in the 5th-10th century. According to legend, the king sought to build a grand palace here in a single night. Calling upon supernatural allies, jinn, guardian spirits, or perhaps even divine beings, he summoned stones from across the land. They say the pillars flew through the air, stacking themselves into terraces under the cover of darkness. But just before dawn, something went wrong. In some versions, jealous spirits intervened. In others, divine law forbade the king from completing his work. Whatever the cause, the construction stopped, leaving the terraces as they are today, monumental yet incomplete, a silent testament to ambition curtailed. Other stories paint the site as a place of cosmic alignment, a pyramid-like sanctuary designed to channel the energy of the heavens. Shamans are said to have climbed the terraces under the full moon, carrying offerings and chanting to call down ancestral guidance. Villagers speak of Pundan Darundak, sacred step terraces, where rituals were conducted to honor the spirits of the land. Even today, it's not unusual to see offerings of flowers, incense, or food placed upon the stones, an unbroken line of veneration stretching back centuries. These legends are more than quaint folklore. They preserve cultural memory in symbolic form. The motif of building overnight appears in many Indonesian myths and often encodes the idea of miraculous or forgotten technology, a way to explain how monumental works could appear without the labor of generations. The notion of divine interruption mirrors global flood myths, a great undertaking, halted by higher powers, leaving behind a remnant for future ages to puzzle over. Some elders recall older, more cryptic tales, that Gunung Padang was a refuge during a great flood when waters swallowed the lowlands of Sundaland. Families are said to have climbed here with whatever they could carry, lighting fires on the terraces to signal to others scattered across the highlands. In these stories, the hill is not just sacred ground. It is a survivor's monument, a place where life continued after the world below was lost. Even the site's stones are believed to hold power. Healers claim that certain basalt columns can sing or vibrate in ways that soothe illness. Meditation groups visit to sit among the pillars, reporting visions or deep calm as they attune themselves to what they call the mountain's heartbeat. Whether psychological or something more, such experiences keep the hill alive in community life. In this way, the Gunung Padang, known to scientists, is only one layer of the site's identity. Beneath the academic debate lies a centuries-old tapestry of meaning, kept vibrant by oral tradition. And for those who grew up in its shadow, the question is not whether the place is special, but whether the rest of the world will ever see it for what it is. The first written account of Gunung Padang by an outsider came not from a modern archaeologist, but from a Dutch scholar during the height of colonial rule. In 1914, Nicholas Johannes Kram, a historian and archaeologist working with the Oud-Heidkundige Dienst, the Archaeological Service of the Netherlands East Indies, made his way into the densely forested highlands of Cianjur, West Java. His journey was prompted by local reports filtering through plantation networks, whispers of peculiar stone formations perched on a remote hilltop. The early 20th century was an era when European antiquarians roamed the archipelago, cataloging temples, statues, and ruins, often with a romantic eye, but also with an implicit hierarchy that placed Europe at the pinnacle of civilization. Ancient Java was already famous for sites like Borobudur and Prambanan, which fit neatly into the narrative of Indianized kingdoms. But a rugged hill crowned with rough-hewn terraces? That was harder to place, and to the colonial mind, perhaps less civilized in appearance. When Crom arrived, hacking through tangles of bamboo and undergrowth, he found something that didn't fit the neat categories. Rows of basalt columns lay stacked and aligned into terraces climbing the slope, their symmetry too precise to be natural. He noted retaining walls and stepped platforms, suggesting deliberate construction. In his subsequent report, filed in the official Rapporten van de Oudheidkundigdienst, Crom described Gunung Padang as a megalithic complex, likely a prehistoric sanctuary. He recorded the local reverence for the site, mentioning the tales of King Siliwangi, but treated them as colorful folklore rather than potential historical clues. And then, just as quickly as the discovery appeared in the record, it seemed to fade. Crom's notes were archived, but no significant follow-up expedition was launched. Part of this may have been logistical. The site was remote, the colony vast, and resources finite. But some later Indonesian historians have wondered whether the omission was intentional. In the early 1900s, European colonial narratives often cast indigenous societies as late bloomers, developing monumental architecture only under external influence. Acknowledging a sophisticated megalithic structure with potentially deep antiquity, one that might predate European monuments, could have disrupted that story. In a colony where nationalist sentiment was already stirring, such recognition might even have been politically risky. Some speculative voices go further, suggesting the Dutch authorities deliberately downplayed the site's significance, filing it away to avoid fueling local pride or nationalist movements. Whether or not this was the case, the effect was the same. Gunung Padang slipped quietly into obscurity for the next 6 decades. Known only to the surrounding villages. During that time, the terraces became part of the landscape again. Vines crept over the stones, soil and moss softened their edges, and only the elders kept the stories alive. The hill was a place of pilgrimage for some, a backdrop for everyday life for others, but it remained outside the gaze of global archaeology. The king's unfinished palace, the Mountain of Enlightenment, slept on under the tropical sun, waiting for another moment of rediscovery. The long sleep of Gunung Padang ended not with an academic expedition, but with the work of 3 farmers, tending their fields on the slopes of the hill. In 1979, NDS and Abaddon were clearing brush and leveling ground for planting when their hoes struck something solid. Not the usual tangled roots or stubborn rock, but smooth, flat surfaces that felt deliberate. Digging a little more, they uncovered sections of basalt columns locked together in tight formation, forming what appeared to be part of a wall. For men who had grown up hearing the old legends of King Siliwangi, this was more than a curiosity. They knew they had stumbled upon something the ancestors spoke of, a remnant of the sacred terraces. Word spread quickly through Karyamukti village, and within weeks, local officials visited the site. Soon after, the Bureau of Archaeology in Bandung dispatched a team to investigate. The early surveys confirmed what Crom had noted more than 60 years earlier. 5-step terraces climbing toward the hill's summit, built from hundreds of hexagonal andesite columns, some as tall as a person and weighing several hundred kilograms each. Arranged with deliberate care, the stones formed platforms and retaining walls that resisted centuries of weathering. To the archaeologists of the time, the structure fit neatly within known patterns of Indonesia's megalithic culture, which they dated to between 1,500 and 2,500 years ago. The prevailing view was cautious. The terraces were impressive, but not unprecedented, and certainly not older than the Neolithic. No one was yet speaking of Ice Age civilizations, and yet, even in those first excavations, hints emerged that the story might be more complex. Some stones were buried deeper than expected, and certain alignments seemed to match solar events. A few artifacts, pottery shards, stone tools, suggested repeated use over long periods. The team noted these details, but without advanced dating methods or deeper excavation. They remained footnotes for the local community. However, the rediscovery was more than an archaeological footnote. It was a validation of oral tradition, proof that the stories passed down through generations contained a kernel of truth. Pilgrimages to the terraces became more frequent. Offerings were placed on the stones again. Elders spoke of the mountain calling out to be remembered. Nationally, Indonesia was in a period of post-independence cultural pride. The 1979 surveys gave the government an opportunity to showcase the archipelago's deep heritage. Yet, as with the Dutch records decades earlier, the findings were framed conservatively. Gunung Padang was presented as an important megalithic site, but one safely within the bounds of accepted history. The possibility of far greater antiquity, hinted at in folklore and in the site's imposing scale, remained unexplored. And so, while the terraces were cleared, mapped, and documented, the deeper layers of the hill were left untouched. For another generation, Gunung Padang would remain both known and unknown, visible in the sunlight, yet hiding the mysteries that lay beneath. To walk the terraces of Gunung Padang today is to step into a structure that defies the casual observer's expectations of prehistoric engineering. From the base of the hill to its summit, the site sprawls across roughly 150,000 square meters, larger in footprint than many modern stadiums, and rises in 5 great steps that give the impression of an immense stone staircase ascending into the clouds. Each terrace is defined by tightly fitted basalt columns, quarried from the region's volcanic bedrock. Many of these columns are hexagonal, their shape a product of cooling lava, yet here they have been selected, moved, and placed with an attention to symmetry that feels almost mathematical. The stones can weigh hundreds of kilograms apiece, and their arrangement suggests not random piling but deliberate architectural intent. Some lie flat, forming pavements and platforms. Others stand on end, creating walls and vertical supports. Terraces narrow as they rise, producing a stepped pyramid silhouette reminiscent of far-flung cousins like Teotihuacan in Mexico or Caral in Peru, though if the deepest layers truly date back to 25,000 years ago, Gunung Padang would predate those sites by tens of millennia. Dominating the central ascent is a staircase of 370 stone steps, each worn by centuries of human passage. This is no rough scramble. It is a ceremonial path, broad enough for processions, flanked by retaining walls that have resisted tropical rains and earthquakes. Local guides often describe climbing it as a kind of meditation, a slow, deliberate act that synchronizes the rhythm of the climber's breathing with the pulse of the mountain itself. But it is beneath these terraces that the engineering marvel truly reveals itself. Modern surveys using ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and electrical resistivity tomography have mapped a complex subsurface architecture. The visible terraces labeled as Unit 1 are only the upper skin. Below them lies Unit 2, a denser, more compact layer of stones and soil fill. Beneath that, Unit 3 emerges, a deep core of basalt structures, some 15 meters down, showing signs of intentional shaping and arrangement. Seismic tomography has even hinted at large hollow spaces within the hill, voids with clean, rectangular outlines that do not match natural fracture patterns. One anomaly measures approximately 10 by 15 meters, raising tantalizing questions. Were these chambers built for ritual, for storage, or for something else entirely? The very choice of building materials suggests sophisticated thinking. Basalt is both durable and acoustically resonant. Struck in the right way, the columns emit tones that can carry through the terraces, a property that may have been exploited for ritual or communicative purposes. Some researchers have noted that certain alignments within the terraces appear to correspond with astronomical events, such as solstices, hinting at an observational function intertwined with the spiritual. the overall impression is not of a single, hastily built monument, but of a site that evolved over generations, perhaps even over vastly different eras, with each phase respecting and building upon what came before. The visible Gunung Padang may be only the last chapter in a much older architectural saga, one whose opening pages remain hidden underground, peeling back the layers of Gunung. Padang's history has been less about moving earth with shovels and more about probing the unseen with science. Beginning in the early 2010s, researchers applied a suite of modern techniques: ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, seismic tomography, and core drilling to map what lies beneath the visible terraces. The results hinted at something far older and far more complex than anyone expected. Unit 1. The surface terraces yielded artifacts and erosion patterns, suggesting a construction date between roughly 500 BCE and 1500 BCE. That in itself would make the site ancient by Southeast Asian standards. But when cores were drilled deeper, they struck Unit 2, a denser layer of stonework lying 3 to 5 meters below the surface. Organic materials trapped here, bits of charcoal, plant remains, returned radiocarbon dates of 7,500 to 8,300 years. Before present. And then there was Unit 3. At depths of 15 meters, the drills encountered basaltic material, unlike the weathered surface columns, fractured, compact, and according to geophysical scans, arranged in ways that produced suspiciously rectangular voids. The radiocarbon dates from organic matter in this layer came back in a range almost unthinkable to conventional archaeology, 25,000 to 28,000 years before present. This pushed the origin of the deepest structure into the Upper Paleolithic, an era typically reserved for hunter-gatherers, not builders of megalithic complexes. Skeptics are quick to point out that radiocarbon dating has limits. Organic material found in soil layers can be displaced over time, washed in by floods, moved by root systems, or carried down by burrowing animals, meaning the date reflects when the plant or organism lived, not necessarily when humans built the surrounding structure. Proponents counter that the dating was consistent across multiple cores, taken from different parts of the site, and that the geophysical evidence, the symmetry of anomalies, the sharp boundaries between layers, argues against a purely natural formation. Other tests have added depth to the puzzle. Optically stimulated luminescence, OSL dating, which measures the last time sediment grains were exposed to sunlight, supported the notion that parts of Unit 3 had been buried since the end of the last ice age. Pollen analysis from the same cores showed transitions from glacial vegetation to tropical flora, matching known climate shifts over tens of thousands of years, and suggesting that the deepest layers have been sealed since before sea levels rose to engulf the Sunda shelf. The most provocative finds are the voids themselves. Seismic profiles depict them as hollow spaces with regular shapes, some large enough to walk through if they are indeed empty. In one scan, a chamber at 12 meters depth measured roughly 10 by 15 meters, its outline too crisp for random geology. Speculation runs wild. Could these be ceremonial halls, storage rooms, or even repositories for ancient knowledge? Without excavation, the truth remains hidden, but the possibility alone is enough to inflame imaginations. If the deepest dates hold true, Gunung Padang's earliest phase would rewrite large swaths of human prehistory. It would suggest that during the last glacial maximum, when vast ice sheets gripped the northern hemisphere, a culture in what is now Indonesia possessed the organization, engineering skill, and perhaps even astronomical knowledge to construct a multi-layered monument of stone, and that this monument endured, layer upon layer, until it emerged into the modern world. Asterisk. When Dr. Danny Hillman Natawija first set foot on Gunung Padang in the early 2000s, he was not seeking lost civilizations. His background was in geology, with a specialty in earthquakes and tectonic activity. He had spent years studying how the earth moved beneath Indonesia's islands, not what human hands might have shaped above them. But there was something about this hill in West Java, its symmetry, its terraces, the way locals spoke of it with a mixture of reverence and mystery, that caught his scientific curiosity. By 2011, Hillman had secured modest government funding under President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who saw value in promoting Indonesia's ancient heritage. He assembled a multidisciplinary team: geophysicists, archaeologists, soil scientists, engineers. Their aim was simple on paper, but ambitious in practice: to study the site comprehensively without destroying it, using the most advanced non-invasive methods available. Ground-penetrating radar became their first tool of choice. Like a medical MRI for the Earth, it sent electromagnetic pulses into the ground and recorded the echoes from buried structures. The images that came back showed sharp interfaces where natural volcanic rock should have been chaotic and rectangular. Anomalies where geology should have produced irregular voids. Next came electrical resistivity tomography, which injected tiny currents into the ground to detect how easily they traveled. Denser materials or cavities show up as anomalies in conductivity. These scans revealed layers with different resistivity, suggesting not just natural stratification, but deliberate fills and retaining structures. Seismic tomography rounded out the picture, mapping how vibrations moved through the hill and highlighting areas where stone had been fractured or rearranged by something other than nature. The data began to coalesce into a startling narrative. Unit 1, the visible terraces, matched known megalithic traditions. But Unit 2, buried just a few meters below, seemed older and more compact, with alignments that suggested planning. And then Unit 3, deep and dense, with possible chambers, its organic inclusions, dated to between 25,000 and 28,000 years ago, was unlike anything in the region's accepted history. Hillman's team didn't stop at structural mapping. They drilled cores through the layers, extracting cylinders of earth and stone like time capsules. These were analyzed for microfossils, pollen, and sediment composition. The pollen sequences revealed shifts from Ice Age grasslands to tropical forest, mirroring global climate transitions. Some cores contained traces of a cement-like binder, a mixture of clay, silica, and iron oxide that could only have formed under controlled heating, far beyond what a campfire could achieve. By 2013, Hillman's findings had drawn both fascination and skepticism. He presented them at conferences, arguing that Gunung Padang was not a single-phase monument, but a multi-era construction, each new culture adding to a base laid in the deep past. He noted the site's acoustic properties, with certain stones resonating at 440 Hz, and wondered aloud whether this was intentional, perhaps for ritual or communication. Magnetometer surveys revealed localized magnetic anomalies, sparking speculation about early experiments with geomagnetic energy. The momentum grew, culminating in the 2023 archaeological prospection paper. But as the backlash mounted and the journal retracted the study in 2024, Hillman's work became as much about defending the research as conducting it. Critics accused him of misinterpreting data. He countered that they ignored the totality of the evidence. Even after the setback, Hillman continued to push forward. In 2025, he spoke at the Cosmic Summit and on podcasts, outlining plans for new surveys using enhanced seismic arrays, drone-mounted LiDAR for ultra-precise mapping, and even WAN tomography, a particle imaging technique capable of revealing chambers without excavation. He envisioned sending robotic crawlers into any accessible voids, equipped with cameras and spectrometers to stream discoveries in real time. For Hillman, the driving question remained unchanged. If Gunung Padang's deepest layers are truly as old as the data suggests, then who built them and why? Whether the answer lies in a lost chapter of human history, in a misinterpretation of nature's handiwork, or somewhere in between, he has staked his career on finding out. And in doing so, he has made Gunung Padang not just an archaeological site, but a crucible where science, politics, and imagination collide. Asterisk, while the terraces and subterranean scans of Gunung Padang command most of the attention, a quieter but equally provocative story is told through the artifacts and materials retrieved from the site. These finds, emerging piecemeal from surveys, limited excavations, and core samples, offer tantalizing glimpses into the daily life, craftsmanship, and technological sophistication of its past occupants. One of the most debated discoveries came during the 2013 investigations: small, coin-like metallic discs with faint engravings. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but radiocarbon dating of associated organic residues suggested they could be over 5,000 years old, predating the earliest known coins from Lydia by several millennia. Their composition, primarily copper, with trace alloys, hinted at intentional smelting. The engravings, too worn to decipher clearly, bore geometric motifs that some researchers likened to celestial diagrams or early symbolic writing. Critics dismissed the coins as intrusive objects from later periods, possibly colonial. Yet supporters of the deep antiquity theory argued they might have been heirlooms, passed down and reused across generations, embedding Ice Age heritage into later cultures. That other artifacts point to a broader network of connections. Beaded necklaces crafted from obsidian and polished quartz were found among the mid-terrace layers. The obsidian's geochemical signature matched sources on distant volcanic islands, implying maritime trade, or at least long-distance exchange networks thousands of years old. The beads' fine craftsmanship suggests they were more than mere decoration, perhaps status symbols or talismans used in rituals. Ceramics from the site have also challenged expectations. Rather than crude, hand-formed vessels, some shards show signs of wheel throwing and complex glazing. The designs, spirals, animal motifs, and interlocking geometric patterns have parallels with Neolithic cultures far beyond Indonesia, raising questions about independent invention versus cultural diffusion. Then there are the tools and weapons. Stone axes and spearheads recovered from the site exhibit an unusual polish, as though their makers had mastered techniques for creating sharper, more durable edges. Some blades contain microscopic traces of iron embedded in basalt, hinting at early experimentation with ore, far earlier than the established Iron Age in the region. Whether these traces resulted from intentional smelting or accidental exposure to high heat remains a matter of study. Perhaps the most remarkable material discovery is the cement-like binder found in the deepest cores. This substance, fusing basalt columns in Unit 3, is a blend of clay, silica, and iron oxides, effectively a hydraulic cement that could harden in wet conditions. Laboratory tests suggest it was fired at temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius, producing a bond stronger than many modern mortar. If deliberate, this represents a level of geochemical knowledge that would push the boundaries of known prehistoric technology. The binder's iron content might even have enhanced its durability and, intriguingly, its electrical conductivity, which ties into the site's unusual magnetic and acoustic properties. These material revelations add weight to the argument that Gunung Padang was not merely a ceremonial hilltop, but the product of a society with technical skills, trade connections, and perhaps even an understanding of material science beyond what we attribute to their supposed era. Still, the artifacts are not without controversy. Skeptics argue that many could have been introduced by later cultures who reused or renovated the site. Supporters counter that the stratigraphic integrity, especially in deeper, undisturbed layers, points to a continuity of occupation, stretching far back into prehistory. What is certain is that these objects, whether from 2,000 or 20,000 years ago, have transformed Gunung Padang from a static monument into a living puzzle, a place where stone, metal, and earth whisper of Forgotten hands and lost ingenuity, waiting for the next piece to fall into place. By the time Hillman's 2023 paper was retracted, the debate over Gunung Padang had outgrown the bounds of archaeology and spilled into a global tug-of-war between orthodoxy and revisionism. What had begun as a cautious investigation into the site's layered history had morphed into an intellectual battlefield, with each side convinced the other was protecting an agenda. On one side stood the defenders of established timelines, prominent archaeologists and geologists who argued that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. They pointed to the lack of unambiguous artifacts in Unit 3, questioning the validity of associating radiocarbon dates from organic material with human construction. In their eyes, the symmetrical voids and geometric anomalies could be the product of volcanic processes, fractures, and natural weathering. Some likened the excitement over Gunung Padang to earlier pseudo-archaeological fads, from the face on Mars to the supposed lost cities in the Amazon. On the other side were Hillman and a growing circle of supporters, including public figures like Graham Hancock, who saw the retraction as a textbook case of academic gatekeeping. They argued that critics were dismissing an entire suite of multidisciplinary evidence, geophysical scans, material analyses, climatic data, simply because it didn't fit the accepted model of human development. Hillman was especially vocal about the peer review process, claiming that supplementary data had been overlooked or ignored, and that few of his harshest detractors had set foot on the site or examined the raw data. The dispute became a spectator sport online. On Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, hashtags like #PANGTruth and #OldestPyramid trended. Amateur sleuths dissected GPR images and seismic charts, overlaying them with CAD models of ancient temples. YouTube channels devoted to alternative history produced hour-long videos connecting Gunung Padang to Atlantis, Mu, and even ancient extraterrestrial contact. Mainstream media alternated between fascination and skepticism, often portraying the story as a clash between visionary rebels and the academic establishment. Fueling the tension was the political history of the site. In 2014, under President Joko Widodo's new administration, official excavations were abruptly halted. The stated reasons included concerns about excavation methods, site preservation, and the need for further review. But insiders hinted at deeper motives, political reshuffling, economic priorities, and perhaps even quiet pressure from mining interests in the region. The halt left expensive equipment idle, the terraces once again swallowed by vegetation, and research momentum stalled for nearly a decade. Conspiracy theories flourished in the vacuum. Some claimed that elite interests feared what might be found in the deep chambers, advanced technology, historical records, or energy systems that could disrupt modern industries. Others saw the suspension as a nationalist embarrassment, with authorities reluctant to stake Indonesia's reputation on a claim that could collapse under further scrutiny. By early 2025, however, the pendulum began to swing back. Indonesia's culture minister publicly called for renewed investigation, framing Gunung Padang as a potential symbol of national pride. Plans were announced for staged restoration, beginning with non-invasive surveys before any digging resumed. Hillman hinted at collaborations with international teams to bolster credibility and share costs. Yet even with new momentum, the shadow of the academic firestorm lingers. The debates over Gunung Padang have exposed not only the fragile consensus in archaeology, but also how quickly evidence can become ammunition in broader battles over identity, authority, and the ownership of the human past. Whether the coming years will bring vindication, refutation, or simply more questions remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the controversy has ensured that Gunung Padang will not fade quietly back into obscurity again. In Indonesia, Gunung Padang has always been more than just an archaeological site. Long before seismic scans and core drills arrived, it was a place of legend, a mountaintop wrapped in folklore, sacred to local Sundanese communities. Name itself means Mountain of Enlightenment, and oral histories speak of an ancient kingdom, wise rulers, and divine intervention in its construction. When the modern controversy erupted, these local traditions suddenly found themselves swept into the global spotlight. Tour operators rebranded their packages to feature the world's oldest pyramid, while souvenir stalls at the foot of the hill began selling everything from miniature basalt columns to t-shirts printed with seismic scan images. Pilgrims and curiosity seekers arrived in greater numbers, blending spiritual rituals with Instagram selfies. For many villagers, the influx brought much-needed income, but also the fear that the mountain's sanctity was being commodified. The Indonesian government found itself walking a political tightrope. On one hand, the possibility of hosting a site older than the pyramids of Egypt promised immense tourism revenue, national pride, and a stronger cultural identity. On the other, there was the risk of embarrassment if bold claims collapsed under scrutiny. Early on, ministers cautiously endorsed the research, framing it as part of a broader heritage initiative. But after the 2014 excavation halt, officials avoided taking sides, emphasizing site preservation over controversy. Cultural scholars noted that the Gunung Padang debate mirrored Indonesia's own struggle with its identity on the world stage. The country sits at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, with a mosaic of ethnic groups and histories. The idea that its land might hold the key to rewriting global prehistory resonated deeply, a symbolic reversal of centuries in which Southeast Asia was often depicted as a cultural recipient rather than a cultural originator. The political narrative also intertwined with broader geopolitical dynamics. Some saw the controversy as a chance for Indonesia to assert itself against Western academic dominance, funding independent research rather than relying on foreign institutions. Others warned that without collaboration, the site risked becoming a pawn in nationalist rhetoric rather than a shared human heritage project. In the meantime, local spiritual leaders have continued their own traditions at the summit. Offerings of flowers, rice, and incense are made at the terraces, sometimes alongside high-tech researchers taking core samples just meters away. The juxtaposition, prayer beside ground-penetrating radar, has become an enduring image of Gunung Padang's layered meaning, a place where myth, science, politics, and identity are stacked like the very terraces themselves. As Indonesia considers its next steps, the cultural and political stakes remain high. If Unit 3 does indeed prove to be a 25,000-year-old human construction, it would not only rewrite textbooks, but also cement the mountain's place as a national symbol, a reminder that the archipelago's story runs deeper and older than anyone had dared to imagine. If the claim falls, the site will still remain sacred, but perhaps as a cautionary tale of ambition, belief, and a volatile mix of heritage and politics in the modern world. As of 2025, Gunung Padang stands at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. The terraces remain quiet under the sun, the basalt columns weathering slowly under West Java's alternating rains and heat. Yet beneath the surface in the layered strata of Unit 3 lies the unanswered question that has drawn scientists, skeptics, and believers alike into a decade-long tug-of-war. Who built this place, and when? New plans are cautiously moving forward. The Indonesian government has approved a phased re-exploration program, beginning with non-invasive surveys, drone-based LiDAR mapping, refined ground-penetrating radar, and magnetotelluric imaging to create more accurate 3D models of the subsurface. Only after a full year of this work will selective excavations be considered, and even then under strict conservation protocols. This approach aims to avoid the hasty digs and fragmented data sets that plagued earlier efforts. International collaboration is also on the horizon. Hillman has hinted at bringing in independent labs from Japan, Europe, and the United States to analyze new core samples. with all raw data to be made publicly accessible, a transparency measure designed to undercut accusations of secrecy or selective reporting. UNESCO representatives have even expressed preliminary interest in adding Gunung Padang to Indonesia's World Heritage Site nominations, provided its cultural and archaeological significance can be firmly established. Meanwhile, the online conversation shows no sign of slowing. Some YouTube channels already speculate that the renewed research will finally prove a lost civilization's existence. Others argue the whole affair will end with a quiet academic shrug. Both extremes keep the clicks coming, ensuring that the site's name continues to circulate globally, even among audiences with no prior interest in Indonesian history. For local residents, the future is a mix of hope and concern. Hope for sustainable tourism that brings income without overwhelming the small mountain villages. Concern that the site could be overrun or, worse, permanently damaged by poorly managed excavations. Community leaders are now pressing for guarantees that they will be consulted in every stage of planning, from infrastructure development to the handling of artifacts. What makes Gunung Padang's future especially uncertain is that it now exists in two realities at once: the tangible reality of basalt terraces on a West Javan hillside, and the speculative reality that lives in headlines, documentaries, and late-night podcast debates. Whether those two realities will one day converge, with definitive proof of human construction in the deep past, is a question science may yet answer. But even if it doesn't, the site has already achieved something remarkable. It has ignited global curiosity about Indonesia's deep history, challenged entrenched academic narratives, and reminded the world that the human story is far from fully written. For now, Gunung Padang remains what it has been for thousands of years, a silent guardian above the valleys, holding its secrets close, waiting for the day we finally understand what lies beneath its stones. Asterisk at sunset, the terraces of Gunung Padang take on a different character. The late light turns the basalt columns amber, shadows stretch like dark fingers across the grass, and the surrounding hills fade into a blue haze. The air cools, and the sound of cicadas gives way to the distant hum of village life below. It's in these moments, when the mountain is still and the crowds are gone, that the weight of its mystery is most palpable. Here, the lines between history and legend blur. Was this place the ceremonial heart of a long-forgotten civilization, built in an age when ice still gripped much of the world? Or is it simply the work of a much later culture, cleverly built atop a natural hill? To walk the terraces is to walk through both possibilities at once, each step echoing with questions that no single discipline can fully answer. For geologists, the stones speak in the language of mineral grains, cooling rates, and fault lines. For archaeologists, they whisper of human hands, deliberate cuts, and patterns that nature rarely makes on its own. For local elders, the site tells stories older than memory, of kings, gods, and trials of courage. Each interpretation is its own kind of truth, layered one atop the other like the mountain's own hidden strata. Perhaps that is the real gift of Gunung Padang, not a single, definitive answer, but an invitation to wonder. The site refuses to yield its secrets quickly, demanding patience from those who would know it. It asks scientists to look beyond their comfort zones, tourists to tread with respect, and storytellers to balance imagination with humility. In the years to come, excavations may continue, dating methods may improve, and our picture of early human history may shift. But even if every basalt column is measured, every core sample analyzed, and every layer mapped in high-resolution 3D, the mountain will always hold something back. Some truths are meant to be felt as much as they are known, and so Gunung Padang remains a pyramid or a hill, a temple or a tomb, a relic of the Ice Age or a monument of a later age, rising quietly above the West Javan landscape. It waits in the company of the stars, in the shadow of passing clouds, for those who will come after us. Whether they will solve its mystery or simply add their voices to the long chorus of wonder, only time will tell. Until then, the mountain endures and the stones keep their counsel.